Xavier Becerra's journey from a modest barrio in Sacramento to the highest levels of American government is a story that mirrors the ambitions of millions of Latino families. His father, a Mexican immigrant who worked as a laborer and later a carpenter, instilled in him a fierce work ethic and pride in his heritage. Becerra became the first person in his family to graduate from college, earning a law degree from Stanford University. He entered politics in 1990, winning a seat in the California State Assembly, and 2 years later he made history as one of the first Latino representatives from California in the U.S. House. For 24 years, he served in Congress, rising to become the first Latino to hold the position of House Democratic Caucus chairman. In 2017, California's governor appointed him Attorney General, making him the first Latino to lead the state's Department of Justice. Then, in 2021, President Joe Biden nominated him to serve as Secretary of Health and Human Services, the highest-ranking Latino in the administration. Throughout his career, Becerra has often used his own biography as a political tool, emphasizing his roots to connect with Latino voters. At rallies and town halls, he frequently recounts his father's story of coming to the United States with nothing but hope. He speaks Spanish fluently, often code-switching between English and Spanish to address diverse audiences. For many Latino voters, especially those of Mexican descent, Becerra's heritage is a source of pride and a signal that their community has a seat at the table. A 2021 Pew Research Center study found that 68% of Latino voters say that seeing a Latino in high office makes them feel more represented. That emotional connection can translate into votes, particularly in swing states like Arizona, Nevada, and Florida. But the idea that heritage alone guarantees loyalty is challenged by the reality of a deeply diverse and politically fragmented Latino electorate. Nearly one-third of Latino voters in a 2022 survey said that a candidate's ethnicity is not a major factor in their choice. Some shrug because they prioritize policy over identity, pointing to Becerra's record on issues like healthcare and immigration. Others are skeptical that any single politician can address the economic struggles facing working-class Latino families. Then there are those who simply do not see themselves in Becerra's story, especially Cuban Americans in Florida or Puerto Ricans in New York. The term Latino itself is an umbrella that covers more than 20 different national origins, each with distinct histories and priorities. Becerra's Mexican-American background resonates strongly in the Southwest, but it holds less weight in Miami's Cuban enclaves. There, voters often identify more with their specific country of origin than with a pan-ethnic label. In fact, a 2020 poll by Unidos US showed that 44% of Latino voters say they prefer to be identified by their family's country of origin. This fragmentation means that appeals based solely on ethnicity can backfire if they ignore regional and cultural differences. Becerra himself acknowledged this in a 2019 interview, stating that identity is a starting point, not a finish line. His critics on the left argue that he hasn't done enough to address the root causes of Latino poverty, such as wage gaps and housing insecurity. On the right, conservative Latino voters see his support for abortion rights and gun control as out of step with their values. Among evangelical Latinos, who make up about 20% of the Latino electorate, Becerra's stance on religious freedom has drawn sharp criticism. This complexity is not new. In 2016, Donald Trump won 28% of the Latino vote despite his harsh immigration rhetoric. 4 years later, Biden improved that margin to 59%, but Trump still increased his share among Latino men in Florida and Texas. The lesson for politicians like Becerra is clear: heritage can open a door, but it does not guarantee entry into voters' hearts. Data from the Latino Decisions poll in 2020 showed that the top 3 issues for Latino voters were the economy, healthcare, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Immigration, often assumed to be the #1 concern, ranked 4th. Becerra's role as HHS secretary during a pandemic gave him a platform to address healthcare disparities affecting Latinos, who were 2.5 times more likely to be hospitalized with COVID-19. He pushed for more funding for community health centers and expanded access to COVID-19 testing in underserved neighborhoods. Those efforts won him praise from groups like the National Council of La Raza, but also accusations of government overreach from some Latino small business owners. The tension between symbolic representation and tangible results is a recurring theme in his career. Consider his time as California Attorney General, where he filed more than 100 lawsuits against the Trump administration. Many of those suits defended Latino immigrants, such as the challenge to the "Remain in Mexico" policy. Yet, some immigrant rights activists criticized him for not personally visiting detention centers or calling for their closure. Becerra's response was pragmatic: "We fight in court because that's where we can win." This legalistic approach appeals to some voters who admire his tenacity, but it frustrates others who want more direct, visible advocacy. Another unique fact: Becerra was the first Latino to argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court as a member of the House, in 1995. That case, United States v. Lopez, dealt with gun-free school zones, and Becerra's brief was cited in the majority opinion. His intellectual rigor is undeniable, but charisma on the stump is not his strongest suit. In a 2018 campaign event for a fellow Democrat, he once paused awkwardly for 10 seconds while the teleprompter failed. Such moments remind voters that he is a policy wonk, not a natural performer like Barack Obama or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. For some Latino voters, especially younger ones, that lack of flash is a turnoff in an age of viral social media clips. But older, more traditional Latino voters often see his seriousness as a sign of maturity and respect. The generational divide within the Latino community is one of the most underreported factors in American politics. A study by the Pew Research Center in 2021 found that 55% of Latino voters under 30 identify as liberal, compared to only 30% of those over 65. Becerra, at 66 years old, falls into the older demographic, and his policy priorities sometimes clash with the progressive wing. His support for the Affordable Care Act is widely popular among older Latinos who rely on Medicare and Medicaid. But younger Latinos want him to go further, advocating for a single-payer system that he has publicly resisted. On climate change, he has been cautious, while younger activists demand bold action to combat pollution in Latino neighborhoods. The environmental justice movement, led by groups like the Chicano Environmental Justice Network, sees Becerra as a moderate at best. Yet, when it comes to voting, many of these same activists still cast their ballots for him because of the alternative. The Republican Party's current stance on immigration and racial equity makes it hard for many Latino voters to cross the aisle. A 2022 NBC News poll showed that 57% of Latinos believe the Republican Party is hostile to their community. That sentiment gives Democrats like Becerra a structural advantage, even when his personal appeal is lukewarm. But the shrug from some Latino voters is not just about policy, it is also about authenticity.